Welcome back to the Dell Experience at South by Southwest. It is great to be with everyone. I am JJ Davis. I lead corporate affairs at Dell Technologies. And I can remember 2 years ago when South by was canceled. This is my first work event in more than 2 years, and it is so great to be with all of you guys, especially for this conversation this morning with Arthur Brooks, who I will introduce in just a moment. We're going to be talking about the meaning of meaningful work. And now as people, how we no longer need to separate our life from our work. We work to live, not live to work. And at Dell Technologies, we've been talking about that on an almost daily basis since the pandemic struck. And I think it's one of those silver linings where now through Zoom, you can peer into each other's lives, see our pets and our kids and our messy kitchens. And it brings a whole new side of yourself into the office. But then that importance of being together in person is also special, and what Arthur will talk a little bit about today. And when you think about company culture and with the Great Resignation and with all the choices that people now have, culture and compensation come together as really important ways to attract and retain team members. I've been at Dell for 20 years, and it is an extremely entrepreneurial culture where we're encouraged to come up with solutions, solve problems, take risks. And being there with people I love that inspire me every day is a big reason I stay. And so we're going to explore some of these ideas around the meaning of meaningful work. Arthur Brooks is here. He is a professor at Harvard, a best-selling New York Times best-selling author, has a podcast on happiness. So who better to talk about meaningful work and happiness than Arthur? So come on up. Arthur's going to talk to you guys for a little bit, and then I'll rejoin for some Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, JJ. Thanks to all of you. Great to see Michael. What a delightful experience to be here at South by Southwest and all of you with the Dell Experience. I'm here with a contingent from The Atlantic, where I'm a columnist. I'm the happiness columnist at The Atlantic, and I teach happiness at the Harvard Business School. What a weird thing, right? And yet, this is the future of how we should understand how to be a successful manager, how to be a successful leader. If you're not, I'm going to make the case, if you're not a happiness teacher in the course of your leadership, you're going to be left behind. But even worse than that, you're going to be missing a huge opportunity in your life and an opportunity to lift other people up. Now, the way I talk about happiness in my class with Harvard, this is not touchy-feely. This is the best science on the explosion of the neuroscientific research and social science of human happiness. The truth is that you may say to yourself, look, we all want to be happy. If it were that easy, we'd all be happier. The problem is that most of us have the wrong approach to getting happier. If you want to get happier, you need to do the work. Just as if you told me, I wish I knew more math, I'd say, get a book. You need to actually understand the science of happiness. You need to apply it to your life, and you need to share it with others. So good news. If you're in the people business, you have the opportunity to get happier by taking some of the ideas that I'm going to just introduce to you very briefly in the context of human resource management and applying them to your leadership journey. Now, everybody is still talking about the lingering effects of the coronavirus epidemic, COVID-19, what it's done to workplaces. Look, we're all virtual. I used to go to my office at Harvard University and do my research work there. I worked there every day. Why? Because it was quiet, and I saw my colleagues, and now I'm going 1 or 2 days a week, the days that I teach. And the rest of the time, I'm Zooming out of my home Zoom studio and my home radio studio and the things that were inconceivable to me before. The question is not whether that's better or worse. It's reality. It's what's going to happen. The only question is, how do we turn that into an opportunity to make a better world? Let me take it up a notch. How do we turn the coronavirus epidemic, what it's done to our lives and what we've learned from it, into an opportunity for growth? Now, those of you who are associated with Dell are going to find this to be a very synchronistic idea in the way that you work, because this is the most entrepreneurial company in America. You know perfectly that opportunities always come from problems. As a matter of fact, opportunities only come from problems. If you're an entrepreneur, you see a problem, you should say, that's an opportunity to analyze the problem, to solve the problem, to learn from the problem, and to grow as an organization. The 4 steps to taking what's bad and turning it into what's better. So that's what I want to do. I want to take a few minutes and talk to you about how you can live a better life and bring a better life to other people using the science of happiness, understanding what just happened with the coronavirus epidemic. Now, it's undeniable that this has been a huge trauma. Even if you haven't lost a loved one to disease, even if you haven't lost your business or your job, it's still incredibly traumatic. I'm looking at the data right now, and there's a new syndrome that has emerged in the mental health profession called COVID anxiety syndrome. It's like they made up a new mental illness, but what it really is clinical anxiety on the basis of what people have endured by the lockdowns, by the lack of freedom, by the lack of ability to talk to loved ones. It's been hard for everybody. Now, I also see this in the data on depression. Clinical depression is a major health problem. Everybody knows that. All of us know people who've suffered from this. Under ordinary circumstances, 9.5% of Americans display symptoms of major depressive disorder. 9.5%. That's a lot. That's too much. Right now, it's 28%. 28% of Americans are walking around with symptoms of major depressive disorder. We've never seen anything like this since we've been charting these data. Why is that? Simple. Two issues. The big spikes in anxiety and depression come from uncertainty and loneliness. It's that simple. Uncertainty about the future. Look, you're looking at the TV, you're reading the news. Is the next variant coming? What's it going to do to my job? What's it going to do to the markets? What's it going to do to my pension? What's it going to do to my grandmother? And just as bad, what does this isolation mean for me? If I'm glad I have the convenience of working at a distance. I'm glad that we can be productive. The technologies are wonderful, but I feel alone. I want more contact. These are huge opportunities, and let me take them in turn. And let me start backwards with loneliness. Loneliness was at epidemic proportions in the United States and in many places around the world before the coronavirus epidemic. We have this great Surgeon General in the United States named Vivek Murthy for President Biden. He was also the Surgeon General for President Obama, and he's a wonderful Surgeon General. He's not trying to get on TV all the time. He's trying to make our lives better. I had him on my show, and I said, just kind of to set him up for a softball answer, I said, Dr. Murthy, what is the biggest public health crisis in America today? This is during the coronavirus epidemic. He didn't say the coronavirus epidemic. He didn't say the opioid epidemic. He didn't say the gun violence epidemic. None of that. No. He said the loneliness epidemic. He's been charting this. He says that loneliness is the biggest public health problem in America today because this is what he hears about. And when he looks at the data, this is what's lying behind these problems. And he said it predates the coronavirus epidemic, but exploded during the epidemic. Now, when we look at loneliness, which we've all experienced, it has a funny characteristic to it. You remember during lockdowns, now some of you live in Texas, and it was not locked down as other places. I lived in Massachusetts all the way through it, and it's still pretty locked down in a lot of places. It was a weird sensation, almost a physical restlessness that we had. See, loneliness does this funny thing to your brain. It makes you on edge, but tired at the same time. I would get a lot of sleep, but I would wake up sleepy. And everybody was talking about it in more or less the same way, this physical restlessness, this inability to get in the zone, not to be able to focus. Almost as if there was something going on in the prefrontal cortex. And there is. It's a lack of a hormone. It's actually a neuropeptide that functions as a hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin is the neurotransmitter of human bonding. It's a miracle. Now, evolutionary biologists, they notice that people bond together with this chemical so that they will love each other. The sensation of love usually starts with this oxytocin, the warmth that you get when you see a long-lost friend, when you see your child, when you see your beloved. The greatest explosion of oxytocin comes when you lay your eyes on your newborn infant. It's like the 4th of July in your head. I remember this, that when my wife was pregnant with our first son, this was a long time ago, and I was studying oxytocin. I was studying the neuroscience of loneliness, and I thought, well, now that I know about it, I'm not going to get it. because, you spoil everything with this knowledge. But sure enough, in the delivery room, when they let me pretend that I was helping, just keeping me far enough away that I don't faint on my wife, and my son was born, and they put him in my arms, and he looked up at me, and it was like Roman candles. And later, we have more children. My last child is adopted. This is a social science experiment, kind of, right? Will I get it? Will I get it? And I went to an orphanage in China by myself. My wife wasn't there. She wasn't a citizen. She couldn't do the adoption. And they put this squalling, unfamiliar, strange-smelling orphan, 2 years old, in my arms. And she looked up at me with her little eyes, and boom! It's the same thing. And every time I see her, still today, it's a miracle. So when do you get it? In response to two things: eye contact and touch. That's when you get oxytocin. And if you don't get those two things, you'll be bereft and you won't know why. Why do I feel so restless? Why can't I sleep? Because you're lacking the neurotransmitter of love, the love molecule. You crave it. You're addicted to it. You need it. So what are you going to do? Well, here's what a lot of people do. They binge on social media. We found that social media in some demographic groups during the coronavirus epidemic went up by 6x. 6 times. If you were using the internet, talking to people on social media 2 hours a day in the old days, which is a lot, it could be 12 hours a day. People my age, academics, my colleagues, sending out 40, 50 Twitter messages a day. Why did they do that? They weren't just trying to ruin their careers, which they were. The reason they were doing that is because they were craving oxytocin, but they weren't getting any. No eye contact, no touch. It's the burgers and fries of social life. That's actually an apt comparison. How does junk food work? You're hungry, and you eat it, and the problem is very low nutrients, very high calories, which means despite the fact that you've got your caloric intake for the day, 2 hours later you're hungry again because your body says, give me the nutrients. Same thing with social media. You binge on it and you crave more, and you binge on it and you crave more. This is the dangerous business of social media. It addicts you from the neuromodulator called dopamine, and it keeps you in the search for oxytocin. That's a bad strategy. The more you do it, the lonelier you get. We need other ways to deal with this. We need creative ways to deal with this. So what are the opportunities for all of us? One of the things I talk about in my column in The Atlantic, in the classes, and I travel around talking about this with companies these days, is we need creative ways where people can have contact notwithstanding the changes in the modern workforce. We must have real eye contact because on the screen there's very little oxytocin, and obviously there is no touch, there is no embrace, there is no human-to-human contact. So we actually have to help people do this in different ways. You want more oxytocin? You want to know how to spike your oxytocin maximally for good health and happiness? A 22-second embrace every 2 hours. You need that. Take that home with you. If you live with somebody else, you need a therapeutic 22-second hug every 2 hours. Now, it turns out, weirdly, you don't just have to get this from your fellow humans. There's research on animals, believe it or not. Canines and Homo sapiens were evolved in parallel, for example. And what we find is that they both experience oxytocin with eye contact and touch. When you pet your dog, you touch your dog and look into your dog's loving eyes, you always feel like the dog loves you. The dog literally loves you. Your dog is getting a 57% oxytocin, blood oxytocin increase, which is like looking into the eyes of your most dearly beloved person in your entire life. Your cat gets a 12% increase. So, being a social scientist, you're always studying the obvious. Your dog loves you. Your cat can take you or leave you, the bottom line. But there's lots of ways to do this, but you must have touch and you must have eye contact, and if you can't get it serendipitously, you must do it on purpose, and we must share this with the people that we lead, with the people under our care. We have to talk to them openly about the science of actually how this works, to say, It is great that we're remote. It is great that it's convenient. It is great that we're distributed. Take care of yourself, because it will not take care of itself if you don't. Second, let's talk about uncertainty. I just talked to you a little bit about the engine of depression, which is loneliness. Now let's talk about the engine of the anxiety epidemic that we get coming out of coronavirus, and how this actually represents an incredible opportunity for us in business and leading people. Now, to understand uncertainty, you have to understand that there is a fear mechanism that's maladapted to modern life. So fear is one of the basic negative emotions. The basic negative emotions, there's four, and the way that they're fear and anger and sadness and disgust. These are emotions that happen to you. There's basic positive emotions too, which are joy and love and interest. If you think it's interesting what I'm talking about right now, that actually gives you pleasure. And the reason that's a basic positive emotion is because you're evolved to enjoy interesting things. There's a reason for that. It makes you better as a person, makes you more successful as a person. It's interesting for you to learn a new way through the bushes to find the bush with the berries on it and eat it, because you're more likely to pass on your genes. You understand the evolved nature of interest. If you're a curious person, it means you have a lot of that evolved positive basic emotion, and that means you would have been 500,000 years ago a more successful caveman. Okay. But the basic negative emotions are what we pay a lot more attention to, because negative emotions get more brain space. Literally, they occupy more of the limbic system of the brain than the positive emotions. Why? Because positive emotions are good, but negative emotions keep you alive. And that's what we have always focused on as an evolutionary species, is staying alive. Best of those is fear. Fear is activated through a part of the brain called, as most of you already know, the amygdala. The amygdala has an incredible job that it actually performs in our life that can keep you alive without you even knowing it. I'll give you an example. So you're walking across the street here at South by Southwest, and some maniac driver, of which there appear to be many, speeds through a yellow light, even a red light, and you're in the crosswalk, and you're about to get run over. Now, without your conscious attention, the visual cortex of your brain will record the oncoming car. That impression will be fed into the amygdala, which will signal through the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland in your brain to send a signal to the adrenal glands right above your kidneys. These will then spit out 3 hormones simultaneously: epinephrine, norepinephrine, and cortisol. They'll come right back up into your brain, which will make you sweat and your heart to have palpitations, for you to jump out of the way and flip off the driver before you even knew what was happening. Your prefrontal cortex, your conscious brain, is 3 seconds behind. Just ages later, you understand what happened. It's like, I don't know how I survived. Well, your amygdala saved you. Your amygdala saved your life. And it saved your life dozens of times. All that happens, by the way, that whole thing I talked about, in 74 milliseconds. Whereas your conscious brain is 3 or 4 seconds to register what has happened. Thank God for the amygdala. Now, it's designed for these episodic threats. That's what the amygdala is built for. It's incredible. What it's not designed for are the chronic problems of life. That's modern. So, a close friend of mine who's really big on social media and has a huge social media following, which he has cultivated assiduously. He thought he wanted it, but now it's wrecking his life. Social media, right? He says that every morning to do his work, he has to open up Twitter, which is a contempt machine, right? I hate you, you hate me, we all hate each other. That's the gig, right? And he opens up his contempt machine on his phone, and he says as he's opening up Twitter, he starts to get all tight in his chest every day, and his heart starts to race a little bit. What's happening? He's getting a little bit of fear. His pituitary gland is signaling to his adrenal glands to spit out a little bit of cortisol. Not a lot. It's not a saber-toothed tiger. It's not a speeding oncoming car. It's not an existential threat. But it just feels a little bit like that. That's maladapted fear. And our lives are full of it. That's called anxiety and stress. The reason that your doctor told you, perhaps, certainly my doctor has told me, you need less stress, is because a constant drip of cortisol will literally break down your body and kill you. What stress does, what cortisol does, is an amazing thing. What cortisol does is it allows you to react, but it stops all of the healing in your body. It stops all of the good hormones in your body from performing their functions. And if you have a little drip, 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 you will break down over time. You don't want that. That's maladapted fear. That's from a maladapted system to keep us alive. It's not keeping us alive. It's just ruining our day-to-day happiness. Back to uncertainty. You know, the uncertainty we feel. You're looking at the paper, you look again and again and again. It's like, I heard that in Shenzhen, you know, they're shutting down the province of Shenzhen again because there's a lot of Omicron. But you say, is it Omicron 1 or Omicron 2? Is it a new thing? Some people think it's a new variant. Is it coming here? How's it going to affect me? And you feel that stress. You feel that's uncertainty. And what that's doing is it's signaling, it's scratching your amygdala and setting off the system. And that's what the coronavirus epidemic has done to so many people. Most people are not like, I'm chronically fearful. There's some people I meet who are still walking around with masks outside because they're really, really afraid. That's a different problem. But most of us are, is it over yet? That uncertainty is a tiny little bit of fear. Now, how does fear work? What's the problem with fear? It's not it's uncertainty. It's not that uncertainty is inherently horrible. It's a pretty normal part of life. But what we really want to tolerate is not uncertainty. What we really want is not a life with no uncertainty. What we want is a life where uncertainty can become risk. You look in the dictionary, it says they're the same thing. Uncertainty and risk are the same thing. They're not. Uncertainty has unknown outcomes, therefore incalculable probabilities, and therefore unmanageable contingencies. That's what uncertainty has. What risk has is known possible outcomes and estimable probabilities, and so therefore manageable contingencies. That's what insurance companies do. Insurance companies are literally happiness companies. Think about it. There's lots of things that might happen to me. I might get hit by a crazy driver at South by Southwest. Hope not. But if I do, the widow Brooks will be well taken care of because of my insurance company. That gives me peace of mind. That gives me happiness. So what do we do in the face of the uncertainty about this ongoing problem? We try to neutralize the uncertainty by turning it into risk. And the number one way we do that is by binging on information. How many times have you spent more time than you want trying to learn information that you can't possibly get? Maybe Fauci will say something new and it will illuminate everything. Of course he won't, because we don't know. That's a bad strategy. You can't turn the uncertainty into risk. Another way that we do this is with avoidance. Some people are just pretty good at avoiding. It's like, I'm going to block out everything. I'm not going to pay any attention to anything at all. But that's an even worse strategy because it'll come out someplace else. It'll be sublimated and pop out someplace else. There's this huge literature that shows that when people lose control in one area and they try not to pay attention to it, they'll grab control in an unhealthy way in another area. I remember when my kids were little, my middle son, who's a big strapping, he's 6'5", and he's a forward deployed combat Marine now. His name is Carlos. When Carlos was little, he was 6. He comes home from school one day, and he was a tough kid. But he says, he announced, I'm not going to eat anything but peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Come on, what? And this is where I'm sort of puritanical in this way. This is against our values, Carlos. And it's like, it's just a stupid thing to say to a 6-year-old kid, but but I really wanted to know why, and I was frustrated. And I was talking to my neighbor who lived across the street from me, who had 10 kids. He had like a whole schoolhouse. He was an expert. I said, Carlos won't eat anything but peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. My friend, he says, oh yeah, well, something. He probably got like a new teacher in school or something, right? And I said, yes, how did you know that? He said, it's always the same. They lose control in one area, they lock down control in another area. And I realized, I do that too. I would get like suddenly picky when I was a CEO, something would be going wrong, and the whole world would seem like it's moving around on me. And the dirty secret about being a CEO is that you have the least control, even though it looks like you have the most control. What's it like to have 150,000 bosses, Michael? I mean, it's super fun, trust me. And And so I would start locking down in particular areas. Eating disorders are almost always provoked by a sense of a lack of control in other areas of life. Avoidance is the wrong strategy. So what's the right strategy? And the answer is there's the personal right strategy and there's the management right strategy. Now, the personal right strategy starts with a technique that I teach all of my students called metacognition, which sounds like a new agey thing, but it's not. The Buddhists have always said that you must meditate on your feelings, urges, appetites, and tendencies. When you meditate on them with a certain remove, as if they were happening to a third person, then you can manage them. That turns out to be incredibly good neuroscience. What happens is that you have urges and tendencies and appetites and feelings that happen to your limbic system, right? These are things happening to you. A person who's reactive simply reacts on the basis of those impulses. If you meditate on them, you think about them, you journal them, you describe them to another person, you move them literally into the prefrontal cortex of your brain, which is your executive center. So here's the question. Do you want to be managed by your emotions, or do you want to manage your emotions? That's your choice. If you're reactive, they manage you. I don't recommend it. It's not a great life. The reason that you say to your children when they're little, if you have children, use your words, is because you want them to move their emotions from the limbic system to the prefrontal cortex of the brain. The reason that journaling feels so good, it's because you're moving your feelings from the limbic system to the prefrontal cortex of the brain. That's metacognition. When you are feeling uncomfortable because of uncertainty, with the maladapted fear, that's modern life. Make it metacognitive. The first thing when you feel fear about the outside circumstances that you can't control, write it down. Think about it. Talk about it. That is incredibly therapeutic, not just because it's psychologized, but because it's actually moving these to the part of your brain where you can manage them. Then, do the analysis. And here's the analysis. I cannot turn this into risk, and I should not avoid these ideas. Manage yourself by analyzing what's happening. And finally, move it actually to solution. And here's the solution. Personally, privately, to the solution of uncertainty that's driving you crazy. I learned this one from a late-stage oncologist friend. Now, you know what that means. This is the guy who says, I just got your results and you need to come into my office. This is not the words you want to hear from a guy who's checking whether or not you have a tumor. And he's the one who specializes in patients who are just getting the results of a cancer diagnosis that's very late stage and very bad. This is his gig, hard gig. So I said, what do you tell him? What do you tell him? And he said, well, I tell them this, basically. I tell them what they're going to want to do and what they should do. He said, what do they want to do? They want to go home and Google it. They want to go home and talk to Dr. Google. They're going to type in their cancer, and it's going to come back, and they're going to search down the page prognosis. Why? Because they're trying to get uncertainty where they're trying to get certainty where there is none. They're trying to turn their uncertainty into risk. That's what they're going to try to do. They're not going to try to avoid it anymore because they can't. I just told them. He said, that's wrong because it's impossible, and it'll make them crazy. I said, so what do you tell them to do? He says, I tell them to do this. And it always works, he says. I tell them, Nick, tomorrow morning you're going to wake up, and you're going to wake up going, oh, it's another day. Oh, it's the first day that you remember what you just learned yesterday. And then you say to yourself, I don't know what's going to happen today. I don't know what's going to happen this week. I sure don't know what's going to happen next year. But I know one thing. I just woke up. And I will not waste the gift that is this day. Now, you don't have to have late-stage cancer to use that, do you? You can use this in your life because each one of us woke up today. Each one of us has this incredible, miraculous opportunity to turn this into something beautiful. That is the entrepreneurial mindset into this true startup that is your life. I do not know what's going to happen this day, but I will not waste it because it is a true gift. That's the personal, metacognitive, powerful approach. Second, how do we do this as leaders? Now, I've been a chief executive, and one of the things that I know is that there's a tendency when there's threat to hoard the information and not share things with other people because the threat is usually very private and you're trying not to let anybody panic inside the organization. Every threat to an organization feels existential. This could be the end. This could be a crisis. For me, I was running a think tank in Washington, D.C., and it would be, I would walk into my office, and my assistant would say, there are reporters on the line from the New York Times and the Washington Post. That's bad. It's never like, they want to congratulate you on a job well done. No. Okay, so the tendency is going to be, okay, lock everything down. Lock everything down. Don't let anybody know. Don't spook the cattle, right? That's a mistake. The cattle are spooked. They know more than we think they know. They're freaked out. They're living ordinary lives. They want to be happy. They want to be secure. Here's the right approach. You have more information than they do. Use it to turn their uncertainty into risk and watch happiness bloom. So how do you do that? I did a study on that. It used to be at the RAND Corporation, a think tank in California. And the RAND Corporation is a wonderful place because it's highly practical in how it trains decision makers, largely in the military, against cases of uncertainty, for example. And basically it says that if you want to turn uncertainty into risk as a leader, you say to the people who follow you, I don't know everything, but I do know a few things that lead me to make 3 predictions. The 3 predictions, the 3 scenarios are the worst case, the best case, and the most likely case. And then you describe those 3 scenarios in detail. Now, what you're saying is you don't know, but here's what it will look like from the vantage of the executive. People want this information. They deserve this information. They need it, and they won't use it against you. And then you say, here's what I think the probability is of these 3 scenarios. There's a certain feng shui of these 3. You can say, there are 59 possible cases. That's too much. Best, worst, most likely, and here are the probabilities. And then, now, here's when you bring it home. And if it's the worst, here's what we're going to do. And if it's the best, here's what we're going to do. And if it's the most likely, here's what we're going to do. And they're like, I can deal with it. I can handle it. This is the insurance policy. This will neutralize the maladapted fear, and you will see an immediate sense of relief comes over people. Look, I can't get rid of the fear. I can't get rid of the uncertainty. I can't get rid of the source of loneliness, but I can neutralize them. No, I can turn them into a sense of transcendence, and we can make each other better off. In the end, we go through these things, and now it's this, and in a year or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, it's going to be something else. Let's learn from this. Let's learn that what looks like a bad situation is actually a transcendent situation and an opportunity truly for growth. And I'll leave you with this one metaphor for it that helps me a lot. When there's a crisis, how do you use it? You see it as in the weakness, the opportunity for strength. And here's the metaphor that I like to think of. It's actually something that happened to me when I was a kid. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I grew up in Seattle. And in the summertime, my aunt, she had a trailer at a beach city called Lincoln City, Oregon, down on the rugged Oregon coast. She was the receptionist at a hotel. And it was just glorious. It was so great. And so I really liked to fish. And I used to fish in the lakes and rivers and things. And I thought, this year in Lincoln City, I was 11. I'm going to learn how to fish in the ocean. Big fish in there. So I brought my rod and reel and tackle, 11-year-old kid. And I remember I was on the rocks, really rocky, it's very rugged. And I had my line in the water for 2 hours getting no bites. And this wizened old mariner from the town comes up to me. He says, he's like a shack. And he comes out of his shack and he comes walking up to me and he says, hey kid, I've been watching you, which would get you arrested today, but that's not the point. He said, it looks like you're not catching anything. Yeah, I'm getting nothing. And he said, any bites? I said, nothing. He said, it's because you're doing it wrong. I said, what do you mean I'm doing it wrong? He said, you're fishing at the wrong time. You got to wait for the falling tide. Now, the falling tide, for those of you who didn't grow up in the ocean, the falling tide is when the tide is going out at an especially fast point. And if you're in rocks, you can actually see it just weirdly rushing out between the rocks. The falling tide lasts half an hour. And I said, well, that doesn't make sense because the falling tide means all the fish are gone, right? He said, no. That's not when the fish are gone. That's when the plankton and bait fish are stirred up, and the game fish, they bite everything. You'll see. It's in half an hour. So we wait around. Half an hour comes. He's got his line and tackle too, and we throw our lines in the water. He says, now, because he's an expert. We throw our lines in the water, and we're pulling out fish after fish. I mean, it's like 20 fish each in a 30-minute period. And in the end, we're just exhausted, sitting on the rocks. I'm with this old guy, and he's getting all philosophical at this point. So he lights up a cigarette. He says, kid, during a falling tide, you can only make one mistake. I said, what's that? He said, not having your line in the water. You get my point. The coronavirus epidemic is a falling tide in life. And it's not the only one. Some of you have some personal loss that's going on in your life. You're between careers, you're between relationships, probably involuntarily. There's a sense of loss. There's a falling tide in your life, and you regret it. And your tendency is to want to cocoon and to walk away and to regret it or to avoid it or to do something to make it go away. Don't make it go away. The falling tide is the most fertile period. That's when the game fish are stirred up. Get your line in the water. If there's a problem in your company, get your line in the water. If there's a problem in your life, get your line in the water. You must have this period because you will not make progress if you don't. This is a sample of the philosophy of the neuroscience and social science of happiness and how it can help you. If you're interested in this, the column that I write for The Atlantic comes out every Thursday morning. You can learn more about it by reading that or watching any of the many products that we have. And I do that because I want all of us to actually see that the greatest startup is not the company that we work for, but the startup of our lives. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we are going to have a bit of a Q&A. I have some questions for Arthur, and then we'll have time for you guys to ask questions, or we might have a bit of a drill on happiness with our audience. So thank you so much. I learned so much in that 20 minutes. When I think about your 3 predictions at Dell, when we were managing through the pandemic, we would often communicate, here's what we know, what we don't know, and what we think is going to happen. Yeah. We got to a point where Jeff Clark, our COO, or Michael we were communicating on a weekly basis, in person, through meetings or on email. And what we found was we wanted that communication to continue. Our executives were maybe more available to our team members than ever before because it was so necessary to address all of the uncertainty. Right. And I do think a result of that was happiness even amidst such a crisis. And our team members were so thankful for the information, and they were turning to us more so than even the news or the government for the facts. And so I just tell that story to say, with all of your research, can you define happiness at work? Like, is there one definition? Yeah. So one of the questions when I talk to the first day of class, I've got 2 sections of 90 MBAs at Harvard. I mean, these are accomplished strivers, and they want more happiness. They're taking my class for a reason. It's hard to get into the class. I mean, they have these points. They kind of have a bidding system to get into the class. And so it's an investment for them. And I say, okay, well, you're in this happiness class. Congratulations, you got in. It's all great. What's happiness? I mean, you must know, if you took my class, what happiness is, or you wouldn't know how to get that you want more of it, right? And I'll go around and they'll be like, happiness is the feeling I get when, ... Happiness feels like the following, and then make a metaphor. I say that's wrong. Happiness is not a feeling. If happiness were a feeling, there's no reason to have a class at Harvard about feelings. You're paying like $1 billion a year in tuition for a class on feelings. No. We don't want that. I said, happiness is not a feeling any more than Thanksgiving dinner is the smell of the turkey. Feelings come from happiness, but happiness is an identifiable scientific phenomenon. And the way that we understand this is by looking at people who have happier or unhappier lives and seeing what's actually present in their lives. And the way to think about this scientifically, to define this for work or your personal life or any place else, is the same way that you would define food as a product of 3 macronutrients: proteins, carbohydrates, and fat. And if you don't feel well, I'm going to examine. If you come to me and say, I don't feel well, I feel like, I don't have any energy, I'm going to look at your macronutrient profile and try to get you on point, try to get your diet on point, something I do a lot and something I think about because it's actually related to your happiness. Proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. Now, why do I make that metaphor? Because it's the same thing with happiness. To be a happy person, you have to get 3 elements in balance and in abundance. And those 3 elements are enjoyment, satisfaction, and purpose.
Those are not arbitrary terms. Those are very specific terms. Enjoyment is not pleasure. It's pleasure plus human elevation, plus your education and understanding. Remember, and you already know the terms here. You know the science here because I've already told you about it. Pleasure is a limbic phenomenon. Enjoyment is a prefrontal cortex phenomenon. It's an executive phenomenon. And so you take the things that give you a little pleasure, you elevate them with your human understanding, you pay attention to them, they become enjoyment, that becomes part of happiness. Satisfaction is the reward or joy for a job well done. You wanted it, you worked for it, you got it, that's satisfaction. The problem with that is that it doesn't last. And there's a huge science on that. There's a whole song on that. The third most popular rock and roll song of all time is I Can't Get No Satisfaction, which has some scientific validity to it, believe it or not. I mean, Mick Jagger probably didn't realize that he was on relatively solid neuroscientific grounds. The truth is you can get satisfaction, as you all know. The problem is you can't keep no satisfaction. And there's a huge literature on that. And the third is the most paradoxical of all, which is purpose. You all need purpose. You're going to be happy, you need to know meaning. You need to have coherence. You need to have a direction in life, to be sure. You all know that. But here's the paradox. To get purpose, you need pain. To get meaning, you need sacrifice. You need suffering. Suffering is a very sacred and a very important thing. I mean, too much, it's a health problem. I got it. But to eradicate suffering is an unbelievable mistake that people make. You must learn from it. You must grow from it. Paradoxically, if you try to avoid suffering, if you try to avoid unhappiness, you will inadvertently avoid meaning, and in so doing, you will be lowering your happiness. This is one of the things I need to explain to my students. I'm like, wait a second, I thought that if it feels bad, I should get rid of it. No. You need to understand when it's too much, and you need to come into balance, and we have whole modules in my class about suffering and the sacredness of it and how to embrace it and to look at the ancients and what they talked about it, what's happening in your brain, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So here's the bottom line. Whether it's work or life, if you need, which you do, more happiness, you have to look at enjoyment and satisfaction and purpose. And we all need to work to help each other along these dimensions as well.
Awesome. Enjoyment,
satisfaction,
purpose.
Exactly right.
How can companies cultivate those three things and help people find that meaning in their everyday jobs?
Yeah. So here's an interesting thing about the happiest people, the habits of the happiest people. The happiest people have 4 habits that it's their happiness portfolio. It's like your 401k for happiness, basically. There's a lot of little things about health and exercise and all kinds of, but no. The biggies are they walk a spiritual path, which may or may not be traditionally religious. It may not be religious at all, but they walk a transcendental path. They pay serious attention to their family relationships. However they define those what family is, they pay attention and they cultivate their family relationships, and they don't walk away from family relationships because of stupid things like geographic distance or political differences. The third is that they have real friends, not just deal friends, and you all know the difference. And the fourth is that they have work that has meaning and it brings a sense of purpose to life. And all jobs is interesting. I mean, I'm an economist, so I've studied jobs. I want to know which ones, public sector, private sector, high income, low income, high education, low education, engineers versus bureaucrats. Doesn't matter. None of it matters. There's only 2 things that matter. 2 things, and this is the answer to the question.
Okay.
2 things give you a job that brings lasting and stable happiness. Earning your success and serving others. Earning your success means your skills meet your passions and your accomplishments are rewarded in a fair way. You know how well you're doing and you can do better. Number 2 is you believe you're serving other people and you can see it tangibly. So what does this mean for us? All of us, we've all had employees and we have people who we lead. If you want to enjoy your work more, make sure that you're earning your success. You're in a position, a job, and a mindset in which you're earning your success and you believe you're offering up your work for the people who need it. That's number 1. And if you want to have people who work for you who are happier, which you should because it's the ethical and the right thing to do, make sure that you're in a system where they are earning their success. It's not arbitrary. It's not capricious. It's not opaque. No. They are matched with their skills and their passions, and they know when they're doing well, and they get recognition when they're doing well. That's earning your success, and they actually know who they're serving. I mean, it's interesting. It's like the CEO. When I was a CEO, I was running this think tank. I had this team of people doing bank deregulation, policy research, and it was pretty esoteric stuff. And I said, do you know who you're serving? Who are you really serving? It's like, I don't know, bank regulators, I guess, right? You're serving poor people who need credit. That's who you're serving, because the tangle of bank regulations in this country makes it harder, makes it easier for people like me to get credit, and it makes it harder for people at the margins of society to get their careers started, their lives started, and especially if they have bad credit or made bad decisions getting back on the train. That's what bank deregulation can actually do, is bringing the opportunities of liquidity in our society that requires liquidity to people who need it the most. So connect to those people, and leaders need to connect them. Look, what are you doing at Dell? It's a huge deal about the people who are able to do work they wouldn't have been able to do. They're people who are able to lift other people up. They need to see these cases, and in so doing, they can be motivated. So that's how you motivate you. That's how you motivate others. Earn success, service to others.
Well, and you think about the role of technology in servicing the world and how Dell was behind democratizing that and making it more available to more people. I mean, It's so rewarding to think that, you know, we now talk a lot about a purpose-driven company, and even when Michael founded our company, that wasn't a thing. It didn't have a name. Right. But to be part of something greater than yourself, that touches on that spiritual journey that you talked about. You do want to wake up and go to work every day. And speaking of who do you serve, you know, for us, it's all about our customers and what our technology helps them do. And I wake up every day and know that what I'm doing is helping a company transform or the world transform, and it's making a difference. And I think that's what my team gets really fired up and jazzed about. I think it's also about the say-do ratio. How do you move beyond a statement to actually impact? So when I think about what companies get wrong and how they engage their team members and help them be more happy, a lot of it is when you say one thing and you do another. Like, what would you say about companies that get it wrong in terms of employee engagement and happiness?
So we're in a case study on this right now, right? Okay. Because the Great Resignation, 53% of Americans say they want to change jobs this year. 26% probably will. That's unbelievable. It's mind-boggling. So then the key thing is, you know, is this just some weird inevitable thing that's out of our control? And the answer is absolutely not. Let's look at what comp is from a job. It's money and benefits, it's love, and it's mission. That's what comp really is. That's the stack, right? So people, you know, so the biggest mistake the companies make is they work on pay and benefits, right? Pay and benefits. Now, the problem with that we all have, we're permanently in a more remote environment, and we got to make the best of it. Lots of it is great, but we also have to make the best of it. The worst thing that we can possibly do is taking friendship out of what we're doing in companies. So it's a huge mistake that people were remote and never know their fellow employees. They couldn't pick their colleagues out of a police lineup. That's a bad idea. You have to get opportunities to get people together in bonds of friendship. Even if we're working in a remote environment, people need each other. I ask you, quiz time, I'm a professor. Quiz time, what is the neuropeptide that functions as a hormone that actually is accentuated when people actually make eye contact and touch? It is called A+. A+. Come study with me at the Harvard Business School. We miss that at our peril. So think about this as your pay is your mission and your money and your oxytocin. And if your company is expunging oxytocin from it, a job just is kind of a job, just a job. It's a job, and so I think I'll get another job. I don't know. It's like if I'm only trading on the money, anybody can trade on money. There's a bunch of computer companies out there, right? But everybody wants to work for Dell if they love their friends at Dell. 70% of people have a best friend at work. 58% of people say they wouldn't leave their current job, even for one that pays better, because they don't want to leave their friends. Don't ruin that in a new environment. We're not going to change the new environment. We got to figure out a way to work around the new environment and then make sure that everybody understands that we have an aspirational vision that goes beyond the bottom line. We want to make a better world. We can make a better world. So we have to not mess up on the non-tangibles in the comp function.
My old boss introduced me to my husband.
Did he really?
Yeah.
That's good.
That's a whole nother story.
Well, no, it's 17% of Americans meet their spouse at work. And sometimes that's unsavory, but a lot of times it's really great, you know?
When we think, my brain has tricked me. I've seen so many people here at South by for the first time, but because of Zoom, I think I've already met them.
Yeah.
So something so simple as I say all the time, turn on your camera when you're in a meeting.
Yeah.
Because, if you're not there, then you can't get to know each other that way. And some managers, I think, aren't really good about forcing that in small meetings. And it's so important if you're remote. And now I know it has a name, oxytocin.
Yeah. Turn on your oxytocin machine.
You can turn that on.
Now, there's not very much that comes from the eye contact over Zoom, but there's a little.
And a little better than nothing.
Oh, yeah, no, it's a lot better than nothing. But we also need as much person-to-person contact as we can, and to maximize it with friendship when we are.
My husband sits 2 feet from me. We share an office. I don't know that I
How's that working?
Well, I don't know if I need more touch every 2
Right,
hours.
right.
I think, there's
like
enough of that going on.
22-second embrace, like, touch me and I'll kill you.
If he's watching this right now, he might be mad at me for saying that out loud.
It's okay, he's not watching this.
So you do a podcast on happiness. Maybe people give you advice on happiness all the time in addition to you giving us advice. Maybe what's the best advice on happiness you've ever gotten through your podcast or your class or your engagement?
Well, people who really know me, and the best happiness advice I get from my own wife, for example, is take your advice, buddy.
Yeah.
Take your own advice. Because, it's one thing to know the neuroscience. It's the other thing to walk the walk. And so I have this I'm on book tour right now for a book that came out 2 weeks ago. It's about how to build your happiness investment portfolio such that you can get happier every year. And you can literally be happier at 75 than you are at 25 if you start making earlier investments in your own happiness. And it's solid. It's based on the neuroscience and the whole thing. And the reason I did it, I actually started it 7 years ago as a personal research project, as a social scientist, to build the rest of my life using my own tools, which is a weird thing to do. I mean, I know a lot of bankrupt economists, and I didn't want to be that emotionally. I didn't want to be that person who's giving everybody advice and then having a life that's really not that great. So I wrote it as my own strategic plan, and I only published it later when my wife read it, and she said, you ought to share this. It's sort of an incredible thing. So that's the most important thing. Now, all of us give other people advice. And I've written about the phenomenon of not taking your own advice. That's called Solomon's paradox, based on the biblical story of King Solomon, who is wisdom, and he told people to stay close to God, and then he had, hundreds of wives of many from people all over the world with different religions, and he started worshiping the religions of his wives, didn't take his own advice, and then his kingdom fell into ruin. That's the Solomon in the biblical tale. That's Solomon's paradox, and everybody does that. So the key thing to keep in mind is you don't need a PhD in this stuff and teach at Harvard, write for the Atlantic on this. You give very good advice to other people. None of you is like, you know what you should do? You should, you don't feel good. You should eat at McDonald's more and stay up all night. It's like, that's not, you're giving people very good advice. Take it. That's the number one thing that you can do is take your own advice.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. So we want to hear from you. There's some microphones in the center, so if you guys want to queue up if you have questions, or we'll play a little game. We've got about 10 minutes left, and we would love to do open mic and hear from everyone in the audience when the last time is you truly felt happy. And I might share mine, and then Arthur, you share when was the last time you felt truly happy.
Yeah.
And then hopefully we'll have some brave souls in the audience that want to join in, ask a question, or tell us when you were last truly happy. So for me, it was last night watching March Madness and all the brackets coming in, because I have 3 sons and their buddies were all over, and for them to want to hang out with mom was really fun. And I have four generations in my family. We do a family bracket, and we all put in $20, and there's a winner at the end, and we stay in touch, and it brings us joy and gives us connectedness for at least the month of March, as long as our teams are still in it until we get to the end. True happiness.
Yeah, and JJ is bringing up a really well-researched point, which is there's really only one way for you to buy happiness, which is not to buy more junk. You're not going to be on your deathbed saying, I wish I'd bought more crap. This is not obviously the case, and we all kind of know this, and yet your brain tricks you into thinking that using your resources on buying things will bring you permanent happiness. It will bring you very little and very impermanent. It's an evanescent feeling. The way to buy happiness is either by buying time or buying experiences with the people you love. I was talking 2 weeks ago. I do a lot of talks for companies now about these concepts for the obvious reasons. And I was speaking to the whole front office staff of the Chicago Cubs. And I said the way that the right marketing for the Chicago Cubs is that how does Chicago Cubs allow you to buy happiness? You show up a guy and his kid at a Chicago Cubs game. And it reminded me, when I was a kid, my dad loved the Chicago Cubs. I've never lived in Chicago, but my dad grew up in Chicago, and he was a Cubs fanatic. And I love the Cubs because I love my dad. And this is the point that you're making. My guess is you kind of like college basketball.
Love it.
But you love it because of them.
Yes.
And you love it because of them. They give you, I love the Cubs because I love my dad. And he died a long time ago, so I still watch the Cubs, and I think of my dad. And that brings me real happiness. You've cracked the code.
I'm a Cardinals fan, by the way.
What's that?
I'm a Cardinals fan.
Are you?
But anyway.
Yeah. And that means probably other people in your family are as well.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So this is a really important point. When's the last time that I was truly happy? And it's right now. Because one of the great secrets to happiness is sharing it with other people. One of the most beautiful things is that the secret of happiness is love. This is the long-standing research. This is not blah, blah, blah. It's, I have an 84-year study that it's at Harvard University called the Harvard Study of Adult Development that is the crystal ball into what you can do to die happy. And it's unbelievable. It looks at people when they're in their 20s and all the way through to their 90s. And it's very simple. The guy who ran it for 30 years said the whole conclusion is 5 words. Happiness is love, full stop. This is an incredibly important thing. And the best way for you to get more love, which is the source of your happiness, is to give it. And the best way to give it is to give people the information that they need to live better lives, because love is to will the good of the other as other, according to St. Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle. And when I stand up here doing my thing, talking to you about the science of happiness, some of you write it down or you remember what I'm going to say and you get a little bit happier, that's my love for you. And that's my love for me. And I'm happy right now.
I'm happy right now, too. I hope you guys are as well.
Hi, I had a question. Something that you said that really stuck out was the point about suffering. And I think in management positions, an instinct can be you want to protect your team and prevent suffering. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if you could speak about strategies to hit the balance between enabling happiness while also not preventing those kinds of formative experiences.
Yeah, this is a really tricky, thanks, a beautiful question. It's a very, very tricky balance. And I worked on this a lot when I was a chief executive on this, because people would suffer. You know, when the company was under threat, when we were getting bad press, when it looked like we were having a bad fundraising year, whatever it happened to be, there would be worry, there would be uncertainty, there would actually be suffering from other people. Protecting people from legitimate suffering is a problem, because what we're usually trying to do is we're trying to ration information to them, which leads to all the other uncertainty and fear that we talked about. It has a downstream impact. Now, that said, we always have to be on the lookout for people who are suffering so much that they're actually suffering from a health problem. I'm talking about mood disorders and major mental disorders. We have to understand the key characteristics and the bellwether clues. And every good manager should be learning this from their human resource department when you think that somebody's depressed, so that you can help that person and direct that person to get help. This is just modern HR, so it's nothing radical that I'm saying right now. Everybody needs to understand and in themselves. But we're talking about the zone, the sweet spot in there. You don't protect people from necessarily from the types of fear that are legitimate. You manage it in such a way, in just the same way that you're managing it yourself. One of the key things that great leaders do is that they will share their own weakness. They will share their own sadness. That means you need, in every board meeting, you need to break down in tears. I don't recommend that. That gets a little weird fast. It's like, the boss is weeping again. You know, it's like all company Zoom. You know, this is not the best. But to say, look, I hate this, is not weakness. On the contrary, it's something that people can relate to. And you say, I hate this. It makes me sad. It makes me angry. And here's how I'm managing it. And I need you to help me. I need you to help me. I need us to help each other through this. That's actually how it works. It's when this is an opportunity. Sadness on the part of the boss is an opportunity for solidarity. And solidarity is what we need to actually cement in mission. Thank you.
We have shorthand on my team where you walk into a meeting and you say, I'm above the line or below the line, if you want to share that. And I do it pretty often and have said I'm below the line, and my team knows that means they got to pick up my slack that day.
Yeah.
Because I'm, and to think that that's now permissible in the workplace. I mean, it wasn't that common in the past.
Yeah, no, it just makes you a lot more effective. Now, JJ is every single day below the line, there's a problem.
Yeah.
Right. My guess is that you're almost always above the line.
Almost always.
Yeah. I mean, look at you. I mean, you're a pretty far above the line person. And that means that when you're below the line, it's going to get their attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to ration this.
That's right.
For
That's
sure.
right.
Yep. Yes, sir.
Those of us of a certain generation, Generation X, we went through a lot of financial upheavals, whether it be the housing crisis or when we were little kids, remember gas shortages. I work with a lot of young people in their 20s, and I remember having conversations just a few years ago. Look, something's going to happen. I don't know what it is. I don't know when it's going to happen. But I think they thought the good times are going to go on forever.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were very blindsided over the last 2 years. How do you basically impart that to sort of a younger workforce, saying that you really have to, it's not just money. You have to, we're creating a work environment for you, and that's value too that you can build on later. And a lot of times they see the turn, but they don't see the road ahead.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, this is one of the great consolations of age, is you get a little bit of perspective on this. This is what I call in my book crystallized intelligence, which is lots and lots and lots of data and how to use it. So your fluid intelligence, your processing speed after about the age of 40 dramatically declines, but your wisdom in terms of the New York Public Library in your head and how to use it and explain it increases. So the key thing that we need to do as managers, as leaders, as professionals, is walk from the fluid intelligence curve to the crystallized intelligence curve, to walk from incredible processing speed and solving other people's problems to knowing which are the right problems to solve, which speaks to exactly what you're talking about here. So one of the, almost a power law of crises is that there's a huge, unexpected, uninvited, unwelcome world tectonic problem every 10 years. Every 10 years. Don't believe it? We got Corona right now. A decade ago, it was a financial crisis. A decade before that, it was 9/11. A decade before that, it was the Cold War ending in a very disruptive way, not for every single one of us in the United States, but go almost any place else in the world, and they thought there was going to be nukes. No joke. Every 10 years is a big thing like that. Now, what does it tell us? And what's our opportunity as teachers? Because that's what senior managers are, just teachers. 10 years from now, maybe less, it's going to be something big. We're going to be preparing ourselves for a financial crisis and a virus. That's what we're going to be preparing ourselves. And it's not going to be that. We know it's not going to be that. So we have a choice of preparing ourselves for the last two crises, or preparing ourselves for tectonic change and how we're going to deal with it as a company and a culture and a family and a community and as a country. And a lot of people are not going to be able to do that, but we can. The greatest, most resilient communities and families are the ones, something bad's going to happen. We can deal with it because we learned from the coronavirus epidemic what it means when there's a colossal food shortage because of some cataclysmic climate problem or a war. Who knows what it's going to be, but it's going to hurt, and that's the opportunity for us to actually get ready now and have greater solidarity and greater mission right now. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Next question.
Here. Hi.
Hi.
Amazing conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Heather. I wanted to ask specifically about working parents and the juggle of that. And, there's so much satisfaction and happiness that comes from parenting, and there's so much satisfaction and happiness that comes from work that you enjoy. But there's a lot of difficulty in juggling the two.
Hard,
I just
super
want to
hard.
get your point of view on that.
Yeah.
And any advice you have.
Yeah, for sure. So a couple of different thoughts on that. Being a working parent of little kids, I'm going to say that your kids are little, right? Yeah. And it's one thing to be a working parent. My kids are 23, 21, and 18. So it's like they're kind of not there, and we need stuff to do. So working parent. But when your kids are little, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. These are kind of new problems insofar as that conventional families traditionally did not have two working parents not that long ago, but most do today, either for economic circumstances or because of choice. Now, it's much harder on women than it is for men. And part of the reason is, my wife and I, we do happiness and couples training for couples that are engaged together. And my wife always says, and I step back a second, because, this is heavy. She says, listen up, ladies. The world's not going to be nice to you, because no matter what you choose, it's going to be wrong in the world's eyes. If you're well-educated, you take care of your human capital development, you have tons of interests, and you decide to work, 4 months after your kids are born, and be like, what's wrong with you? You're a terrible mother. And if, on the other hand, you make the choice, I'm going to stay home with my kids because what I want to do, they're going to be like, why are you wasting your brain? Nobody says this to men. Nobody's like,
Right.
Like, dude, how come you're not staying home with your babies? It's like, because that would be odd, by most circumstances, not every single one. So it's much easier for men than it is for women. It's worth keeping that in mind. And my wife's advice is always, what real feminism is? Making your choices. You own your choices. It's a feminist choice to stay home with your kids. It's a feminist choice to get a nanny. And you have to choose, because emancipation means something. But it means also, true emancipation means being emancipated from the lack of approbation of the world. True emancipation means paying less attention to the social control that actually comes at us from at church and at work and every place else. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. The second thing is that we need to be very assiduous as employers to make sure that we're as forgiving as we can possibly be about the exigencies of these things. One of the great problems in the hustle culture in Silicon Valley, for example, is that people will put off childbearing decisions forever because they want to be in the hustle culture and they feel like that they're not in it, they're simply going to fail. Well, these are not modern companies. These are not good companies, as a matter of fact. These are the companies to avoid. The companies that you want to work for are the ones where you can bring your whole self to work, and that's actually reflected in the way that we value you as a person, not as homo economicus. So those are the two things to keep in mind as a person, the personal attitude to become metacognitive of the decision in the way that you're going to raise your children, and we should become better managers in the way that we become as modern and as human as we can possibly be. Thank you for that.
Thank you. One final question, Anna.
Oh, thank you. This has been an amazing talk, and I wanted to cite a statistic from last year, U.S. Department of Labor, that at the time, 65% of U.S. workers had either changed jobs or were actively looking for new jobs, a statistic I'm sure you're very familiar with. So there's obviously a trend in terms of dissonance between what employers are providing and what employees want. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about cultures of empathy, meaning that organizational dynamic, that intentional and sometimes programmatic approach to making employees feel their employers understand them, but are also sharing these experiences of anxiety and listening and helping create, again, that safe environment of culture where you can bring that whole self to work.
Yeah, thank you for that. So this gets back to the initial idea that your comp is your money plus your mission plus your love, plus your friendship at work. That's the stack of comp, right? And the companies that don't recognize that above pay and benefits are the ones that are going to get the churn. That's the modern world, especially in the Zoom world. Those are the ones who are going to churn like crazy. So yeah, the U.S. Department of Labor said that 65% of people are considering leaving their jobs. 53% are planning to leave their jobs. 26 to 30% will leave their jobs. I mean, this is just, and that's not symmetrically distributed across the economy. The companies that are going to be left behind are the ones that are going to get 50% churn and go into chaos. This is called the chaos point, actually, that we look at in labor economics. When you get to the point where nobody knows what the job is, and so nobody's in charge. It's the sort of the Lord of the Flies effect. And you've been in workplaces. We've all been in workplaces like, who's in charge here? Does anybody know how to do this job? It's like, what do we do here? Nobody knows. It's horrible. That's how all universities work, by the way. So even though they've all been there for 100 years and still nobody knows what's going on, it's weird. So that's the key thing to keep in mind is we must be more serious and more purposive and more explicit about 2 and 3, about mission and love, mission and love, mission and love. What are we doing such that people are not just automatons on the Zoom screen, two-dimensional forever, who practically wouldn't recognize each other if they saw each other in person? We have to bring the resources to bear on making sure that people see each other as people. Now, when it comes to another word that you said that it's really interesting is how can we be more empathetic? One of the things that we need to keep in mind is that great leaders in the current moment, they need to understand the difference between empathy and compassion. Now, they sound like, they're often used as synonyms. I'm not logic chopping here. If you look in the dictionary, they'll use them as synonyms. But empathy is to feel somebody else's pain. And there's a place for that. You should have a basic level of empathy, but what we really need is more compassion. Because compassion is to will somebody else's good and to act that way even when it's hard. And there's just, the difference between great leaders and bad leaders? Bad leaders can be super empathetic, but they're never compassionate. Great leaders are always compassionate. And that means doing hard things sometimes. And sometimes it means, I don't think you're cut out for this job and you could be more successful elsewhere. Empathetic leaders are like, we'll find a way. And that's not good for anybody under the circumstances. So that's what we really need is to check our compassion under these particular circumstances such that people can actually experience the love that they need in their compensation function. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Well, we are out of time. I know we could sit here for days, hours,
thank you,
weeks.
JJ.
It's been a great conversation. Thank you so
make me
much.
happy.
You make me happy too. And I am happy and happy to be with all of you. Have a great rest of the South by Southwest, and thanks everybody for being here.
Thanks.